The barn door swung open, and there she was, my wife, laughing alongside him. The scene burned into my consciousness, inciting an uncontrollable rage. I addressed them, betrayal emblazoned on each of their faces. Rage seized me, resulting in an unforgettable showdown. How did things come to this? A web of deception, infidelity, and revenge. This is the narrative of our unraveling. Ultimately, justice was served, though it came at a significant personal cost. It was a late autumn day, with trees still displaying vibrant colors, but the rain and dark clouds made the atmosphere seem gloomy. This reflected John Watson's mood as he exited his vehicle and rushed into the saloon for shelter. He proceeded to grab a seat near the end of the bar, his expression conveying a sense of unease. His demeanor this week had been noticeably disgruntled. A colleague in his department had abruptly resigned, necessitating John's search for a replacement. He had conducted 3 interviews this week, none of which proved successful. He was reluctant to hire any of those candidates, even for minor responsibilities. The situation was further compounded by the delayed arrival of ordered books and the growing discontent among students regarding their fees. The reading load was becoming increasingly problematic, with students beginning to protest to the school administration. However, the most concerning issue was his marriage. "Hello, Professor," he was greeted by a man he did not recognize. "Welcome. I haven't seen you in a while." Chester acknowledged the greeting as he was cleaning the adjoining pub. The bartender informed him that the drink was ready. John observed the surroundings and noted the dark wooden walls, antique light fixtures, and cracked leather chairs in the booths lining the side of the bar. The setting evoked a sense of familiarity, akin to a secure haven he had frequented since his graduate student days. His thoughts traveled back through the years, envisioning himself as a young man who had completed his doctoral studies in American history. He had recently obtained his doctorate in American history. His article about Henry Clay had been accepted by a publisher and would shortly be published. Furthermore, he had been offered a teaching position by the institution, which he had eagerly accepted. The remuneration was not considerable, but he was genuinely gratified, as all of his aspirations were coming to fruition. His girlfriend, Esther, had recently graduated from law school and secured a robust position at a prominent firm. They had been cohabiting for approximately a year, and John considered it an opportune moment to formalize their relationship by purchasing an engagement ring. The stone was modest in size, but the gesture was significant. He believed that Esther was delighted when he presented it to her, and he felt a sense of pride. With their combined incomes, they were financially secure and able to plan a wedding for the spring. John smiled as he recalled the youthful and energetic Esther, but his expression became somber when he thought of her smile. Her energy and her slim and beautiful figure. She stood approximately 5 feet and 4 inches tall, but her lively personality made her appear taller. Her golden hair was nearly shoulder length, and her blue eyes twinkled with delight every time he appeared. He shared a deep love for her, but his sad attitude returned when he recalled the New Year's Eve party hosted by her law firm. He had never felt comfortable around her colleagues, and this was a source of distress for him. He has always felt as if his job was inadequate, as though it did not meet his expectations. Perhaps his disdain for his colleagues was not adequately concealed, which often caused distress to Esther. She frequently reminded him that her chosen career was important to her, and that he needed to accept it. He came to recognize her point of view and made efforts to interact with them constructively until the celebrations reached their peak around 11 p.m. The time was 10 p.m. The attendees were visibly inebriated. Esther's employer had reserved a significant number of hotel rooms, eliminating concerns about driving under the influence. Individuals arrived with their spouses, and the majority of singles were on dates. Many were exhibiting signs of inebriation, and the atmosphere resembled that of an old wild party scene. The only sober individuals were a couple of senior partners, who appeared discontented. Given the extent of inebriation among the attendees, they proceeded to take their seats at a distant table with their respective spouses, attempting to avoid the surrounding chaos. John observed that Aunt Doyle, the senior partner, appeared to be particularly distressed. Art, however, was one of the few individuals in the firm who held a positive regard for John. Art consistently demonstrated respect for John's work and made a conscious effort to engage in conversation with him at the workplace. Gatherings. John observed Art displaying a grave demeanor and surmised that some grave discussions would ensue later in the week. This conjecture elicited a slight smile from John, despite the underlying humor. He experienced a sense of unease, as he had a history of avoiding social events when individuals became excessively inebriated. He had never engaged in excessive drinking and had never lost control. He resolved not to emulate his father's behavior. He had been drinking and died in a vehicle accident after his father abandoned them both. His mother was left to care for them. JN grew up in a rough neighborhood and witnessed the harsh reality of poverty and a failing educational system. He felt that the school was not fully to blame. The troublemaker parents did not care about school. In reflecting on his history, he recalled that he had frequently skipped school. His grades were poor because he had not cared about his studies. His mother was usually busy and did not have time for him, so he had spent time with a gang until she married Timothy Murphy. Murphy was a police officer, and everything changed for John as a result of this marriage. Murphy demonstrated to John how his gang life would lead to sorrow. John was not lacking in intelligence, and thus was able to make significant progress in a relatively short period of time. He began to focus on his homework and to enjoy it, and he also resolved that he would never allow alcohol to take over his life, as his father had done. This is why John was uneasy at the gathering. Everyone was inebriated, even his fiancée Esther, who rarely drank. She teased him for being very serious. Furthermore, Esther was visibly intoxicated, and John attempted to inform her that it was time to conclude the festivities. However, she became agitated, asserting that it was not even midnight and that she wished to continue celebrating the new year. John waited, abstaining from the oysters. As midnight arrived, he sought out Esther, only to discover her engaged in a romantic encounter with James Moriarty, a young lawyer. The kiss was not merely a brief one, it was prolonged and passionate. John, pale and visibly shaken, approached Esther and pulled her away. Later that evening, John confronted her and inquired as to her state of mind. He asked her to recall that she was engaged. Moriarty made a mistake when he pushed John, who fell to the floor in seconds. Moriarty was on the floor, and John stood over him. Esther was flushed. Faced with this turn of events, Esther was indignant and slapped John, causing everyone around them to fall silent. John was shocked but composed and took Esther's left hand, removing the engagement ring and dropping it on the ground, where he crushed it with his heel. He then abruptly departed the party. John walked to his car, breathing deeply to relax. He felt angry and embarrassed and realized he needed to get back to the flat pack, retrieve his belongings, and leave as quickly as possible. It was possible that Esther had gone too far and that he could not forgive her. This was solely because she was inebriated when John arrived home. He then proceeded to pack 2 suitcases. He looked around, feeling sad. Was this all he had from their time together? 2 suitcases and a duffel bag with personal items. This marked the end. He felt that he could no longer trust Esther. John then discovered a room at a Holiday Inn near the campus. He intended to get a room at the faculty residence. The following day, he came to the realization that he required a period of solitude to reflect on the events that had transpired. The subsequent days were characterized by a flurry of activity as the new academic term commenced. John chose to disregard Esther's communications, as he was not prepared to engage with her. His cheeks still bore the physical effects of her slap, and he found himself longing for her presence. He questioned whether his reaction was disproportionate to a momentary lapse in judgment, but he remained uncertain. 2 weeks after the incident, when John had moved out, he received a call from Mr. Doyle inviting him to lunch at his club JN. John attempted to decline, but Mr. Doyle insisted, so John went, unsure of what to anticipate. As John entered the bright dining room, he noticed Doyle sitting in a CO corner near the windows. He stepped over and Doyle stood up with a smile, greeting him with a warm "Hello, John. Thank you for attending." John returned the greeting, shaking Doyle's hand. "Thank you, Mr. Doyle," he replied. "It is a pleasure to see you again," he replied, though not with great enthusiasm. Doyle smiled warmly. "John, please call me Art. I have previously requested that you do so. I hope you will consider me a friend. Art, I have a great deal of respect for you. I have always appreciated your kindness towards me. John, you undoubtedly understand why I invited you to lunch today. Beyond wanting to spend time with you, there is something vital we need to discuss." John sighed and nodded. He was aware that this was coming and was actually relieved. Perhaps there was hope for healing, and Art could help. Art grinned at John's willingness. The personnel returned to work to find the situation still unresolved. They were given a severe talk. Morari has relocated to a different city. His behavior was clearly not a secret, and he's no longer around. I would have fired him, but this was easier. John lifted his eyebrows. His action was not an isolated incident. He had a thought. He wondered what else Esther hadn't told him. Art grimaced slightly as he noticed his worry. John, I understand. Please be assured that I have conducted a thorough investigation and there is no cause for concern. No further incidents have occurred beyond those already known. I have consulted with Esther on numerous occasions this week and she is visibly distressed. She is not functioning at her optimal level, and the company requires her to be well. Additionally, it is important to note that I value both of you as individuals and am invested in maintaining a positive and productive relationship. It is crucial for you to communicate with her and find a resolution. Avoid allowing the situation to escalate further. Mistake, ruin all you both want. John nodded in agreement with Art's assertion. He believed he was sufficiently composed to speak with Esther. He would telephone her and arrange a meeting. It is time, Art said with a broad grin. There is no necessity, John replied. Art then informed him that Esther was expecting him at their flat for dinner that evening. He urged John not to be angry. He knew John was intelligent and reasonable. He was confident that John would understand his reasoning. John smiled. Riley, all right, Art said. Tell her I will be there, but not during supper. I will arrive around 8. At 10 p.m., we can discuss the matter over coffee. I am grateful to you, Art. You are a good friend. I needed encouragement that evening. John and Esther conversed for almost 2 hours. Esther was initially uneasy, starting and stopping while glancing at her coffee cup. John remained calm and waited for her to speak. He understood that in order to move forward, they needed to be open about what had happened and explicit about their expectations. However, he was not going to make things easy. He believed that Esther needed to take the initial step toward resolving the situation. Eventually, Esther looked up. Up at John with tears in her eyes, Esther said, John, I sincerely apologize. I'm not sure why I kissed him. I'm not sure why I did it at all. I guess I had too many drinks. I'm ashamed of myself, and I hope you'll forgive me. She spoke rapidly, as if she had rehearsed it. John remained calm while witnessing he said, I understand, but that doesn't make it any less painful. You allied with him, not me. Do you remember how it felt? It was embarrassing. If this is what I can expect, I'm not sure we should continue. Esther turned pale and shook her head no. John, please, I love you. One misstep should not undo all the progress that has been made. We must consider the implications of our actions. If we wish to marry, we must be clear about our expectations. If we are to be faithful, we must understand what that entails. Esther apologized again and pledged to never drink excessively. John apologized for losing his temper, though he believed his reaction was justified. They discussed what it meant to be faithful, as well as loyalty and trust. Upon returning to the apartment the following day, it seemed as though things had returned to normal. However, John never purchased another engagement ring, and Esther never requested one. They proceeded with the wedding in the spring, as initially planned. Their marriage was characterized by happiness. They loved each other deeply. Several years later, they discovered that John was unable to father children, which presented a challenge to their relationship. John underwent testing and discovered that his sperm count was low. They discussed alternative options for starting a family but ultimately decided to remain a family of 2. This did not appear to affect Esther as much as it did John. He anticipated that she had shed tears in solitude on a couple of occasions prior to retiring for the night, and thus held her close. She had accepted the situation, and derived solace from her professional endeavors and her relationship with John. John blinked and surveyed his surroundings, feeling somewhat embarrassed at having allowed his thoughts to wander for so long. He experienced a sense of relief upon realizing that only a few minutes had elapsed while he reflected on the past. He observed that his drink was empty and contemplated obtaining another. He made a decision and signaled to Chester, who promptly produced a new drink. John recalled Doyle with fondness and was saddened by Art's recent. The sadness lingered on the edge of his mind. A.C. Doyle and Lila were among the younger partners at the law firm. John considered them to be among his few friends. Lila had joined the firm approximately 10 years ago and had quickly become friends with John. She had first made contact with him at a company event. She was aware that John was a university professor and was impressed. She had always wanted to teach, and John was relieved to find that he was still healthy. He frowned as he remembered his wife. Their 20th anniversary was approaching, but he was concerned about their relationship. This should have been a happy thought, but he was unable to determine what was happening. After nearly 2 decades of romantic involvement, the couple's relationship had noticeably deteriorated. The gradual decline in affection, indifference, and even disrespect had gone unnoticed until recently. The couple had become prone to frequent disagreements and a lack of physical intimacy. In reflection, John recognized that their marriage was facing significant challenges. He was uncertain about how to initiate a conversation with Esther about these issues and lacked clarity on how to improve the situation. He was aware that Esther could be quite direct in her communication and was concerned about the potential for another heated argument. He was perplexed by the notion that he was unable to engage in a straightforward discussion with her. He was startled by a soft voice in his ear, which he recognized as belonging to Irene. She was standing by his side, which elicited a smile from him. He inquired about her presence, asking what she was doing there. He then proceeded to introduce her to the other person in the room. The last person I anticipated seeing. I made a point of stopping by every few weeks, John, simply for the sake of nostalgia. I ordered a gin and tonic for him. I will be right back, she said, as she hastened to the restrooms. John smiled fondly after her. She was Dr. Irene Adler, who was a striking beauty in her late 30s, with dark hair and flashing dark brown eyes. Her striking appearance, characterized by long hair and dark brown eyes, contributed to her distinctive presence. She currently held the role of assistant chair in the Drama and Performing Arts Department. She was the first member of her family to attend and graduate from university, a notable achievement. She and John had been friends since their graduation, and he and Esther had provided her with support through 2 divorces and several failed relationships. JN regarded Irene as his closest friend and valued their relationship. She returned and sat on the stool next to him, picked up her drink, and spoke, "Okay, Johnny, what is wrong? Why do you believe something is wrong, and what's with this nonsense about stopping here?" John replied, "I'm sure you don't come here very often." Irene laughed and sipped her drink. "Sherlock, I saw your car outside as I drove by and wondered why you were there, so I decided to pull over and see if it was you. Are you happy right now?" What had gone awry in his marriage? She sensed the rage behind his words and placed her hand on his arm, attempting to calm him. John finally paused, feeling exhausted but also relieved. He needed this opportunity to express his pain. Who better to share it with? Irene sat quietly, feeling very sad as she listened to her friend's pain. She had no idea how badly John was hurting. For a long time, John had kept his emotions hidden. Irene was surprised to learn about the fight between her good friends. She didn't have an answer for him, but it was difficult to accept that John and Esther's love was so fragile. It seemed that something else must be occurring. John and Irene intervened, attempting to provide clarity. They acknowledged that it was challenging to see the situation clearly at that moment. However, they urged him to consider the multitude of minor issues that were contributing to the current situation. There had to be a reason behind the deterioration of their relationship. What he was describing were merely the indications, not the root causes. Something must have triggered this change. Had he done anything to genuinely upset Esther? Had she done anything to upset him? It was difficult to comprehend how 2 individuals could simply stop caring about each other without any apparent reason. There had to be a reason behind this shift in their relationship. Irene concluded, and John sat there, shaking his head in disbelief. "Irene, I must profess that I am uncertain as to the cause of this deterioration in our relationship. I am unable to identify any single incident or series of incidents that could be held responsible for this unfortunate state of affairs. It is, indeed, the case that we have allowed our relationship to deteriorate to the point of crisis, and I am unsure as to how we might repair the damage that has been done. I believe that the most constructive course of action would be for us to engage in a frank and open dialogue with one another. John, I suggest that you take the initiative and initiate such a dialogue with her." Despite their best efforts, Irene and John found themselves engaged in heated discussions that often devolved into arguments. Irene attributed this to John's tendency to be overly suspicious, which often led to John's own temper getting the better of him. Irene was at a loss as to how to resolve this impasse. In a parallel development, that same afternoon in another part of town, Dr. John Watson's wife, Esther Watson, was leaning back in her office chair. She gazed at the tall blonde man sitting across from her, openly examining him with a slight smile on her face. Esther was aware of Jim Moriarty's intentions. He had been attempting to charm her for months, but she had consistently dismissed his advances. She found him attractive, and his proximity evoked a certain excitement. However, she was not willing to risk her marriage. Despite the current challenges in her marriage, she was pleased to have the opportunity to interact with him. "You have not changed at all. You continue to pursue romantic relationships. Why not consider marriage again? It would eliminate the need to engage in such pursuits." "I am simply being friendly. Why do you react so defensively? You are an attractive woman. Any man would be fortunate to be in a relationship with you. Your husband is not a suitable partner. He prioritizes his studies and personal interests over your relationship. You know as well as I do that you desire me. I can see it in your eyes, and it will happen, Esther." Esther bit her lip and glanced away. Jim's words struck closer to home than he realized. She was aware of the distance between herself and John. They appeared to be growing apart, and his criticism, the remarks about her profession, left a profound impact. She acknowledged that she had once responded in a similarly disparaging manner to his profession. These statements, which were previously regarded as mere jests, now evoked a painful response. Perhaps it would have been prudent to inform John of Jim's return. However, she was reluctant to do so due to fear of his potential reaction. She hoped that her silence would not be perceived as a misstep. Esther returned her thoughts to Jim. "Jim, let us not delve into this topic. My personal life is not a subject for discussion. Leave it alone." Jim just smiled. "I am always available to you. You are aware that I am a reliable friend. I am not naive, Jim. I understand what you desire to maintain a distance from me and refrain from engaging in extracurricular activities at work. Let us now direct our attention to the finalization of the Simmons contract." Jim laughed, stood up, leaned down, and barely brushed his lips against hers before departing, humming to himself. Esther sat quietly for a minute, breathing heavily, feeling humiliated. The extent to which his modest gesture upset her was considerable. She caressed her lips with a thrill, mindful of how long it had been since her husband had shown her tenderness. She was left to ponder the potential consequences of her flirtation with Jim. Would she ultimately give in and engage in an affair? She shook her head, dismissing the ideas that had recently crossed her mind. Esther's phone rang. She responded to the call with impatience, recognizing Stan Hopkins's voice as one of the senior partners. "You are concluding the Simmons contract?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "Stan," he prompted. "It has been taking up our time for some months," she explained. "Why, is there an issue?" "There is not much, but it appears you will have to fly up to see him on Monday. He is unable to come down as scheduled and requires the work to be completed expeditiously. It is now Friday, and we will need to work tomorrow to finish. We will be working under significant time constraints, and I have only Jim to assist me with this task. I will arrange for additional help tomorrow, but we will likely have to work late, and you need to. It would be beneficial to relax as well. Let's aim to start early tomorrow. You and Jim can complete it before the end of the day. I will inform him directly after this call." Esther responded, albeit not warmly, and the call ended. She sat for a time, frightened that this would spark another quarrel with John. He was upset about her lengthy work hours. She came to understand that she was prioritizing her job over their marriage. Esther was anxious and hoped the situation would not escalate into a conflict. She decided to speak to John, who would realize that after this task was completed, they would be able to spend more time together and possibly take a much-needed vacation. She realized that she was irritated with him recently, having observed him snapping at him for no apparent reason. She assured herself that things would change once the job was over. James Moriarty sat back in his chair with a grim smirk. He was aware that Esther was worried and assumed she would finally turn to him. He had never forgotten the quarrel with her husband on New Year's Eve. Morari had been subjected to ridicule, transferred to a different position, and suffered setbacks in his career. However, he was now seeking retribution. He believed that the most effective way to harm Dr. John Watson was to disrupt his marriage to Esther. He felt confident that he could achieve this goal. The temperature had cooled. And a chill permeated the air. Upon arriving at his residence, John observed that the house was shrouded in darkness. He uttered a disparaging remark, noting that it seemed Esther had been engaged in another late-night work shift. His lips curled in displeasure, but abruptly, a vehicle drew up next to him. It was. Esther greeted him cheerfully as he exited his vehicle and awaited his arrival at the door. "Hello, sweetheart," she said. "I'm so happy you're home. Let's freshen up and then I'll treat you to dinner. Let's go somewhere beautiful tonight." "Okay, honey," JN responded, although he felt skeptical. Esther was noticeably cheerful, almost exuberant. Something seemed amiss. It was implausible that people could go from being distant to overly affectionate overnight. Despite his reservations, JN, decided to play along and see what she had planned. JN and Esther enjoyed a wonderful meal. They conversed pleasantly, and John felt hopeful. Perhaps they could resolve their issues and recall why they fell in love and married. That evening, John gave Esther his full attention for the first time in a long time. He felt slightly guilty. Even in her 40s, she remained a gorgeous woman with a certain charisma that drew him in. Perhaps he was equally responsible for their problems. He did not provide her with the attention she required. Perhaps he was excessively focused on his profession, leaving no time for their marriage. Jan resolved that he would invest more effort if Esther did the same. He was aware that both of them played a role in the troubles, but he was determined to try harder. Esther noted that she began to relax and open up. She also noticed him looking at her with passion in his eyes, which made her love her spouse even more and consider herself fortunate to have him. She promised herself that she would work more on their friendship. She planned to finish this last major work project shortly so that she could then focus on her marriage. She concentrated on her marriage. She nestled into John's arm on the walk home. They arrived at their residence and parked in the garage. They entered the warm living room, where John had made a fire. They poured glasses of wine as calm music played on the speakers. Esther was aware that she needed to inform John that she required to return to work the following day and then travel. On Monday, she was apprehensive about how he would respond and attempted to identify a tactful approach to convey the news. She contemplated postponing the announcement until the following day, but she was certain he would be more distressed if she delayed until the last moment. She prepared herself for the inevitable, recognizing that it would not be an easy conversation. "I have good news," she said. "The project is almost over, and we can resume our normal lives. I am aware that it has been challenging for both of us, but we will be finished in a few more days. I must go to work tomorrow to complete the final draft, and then we will travel on Monday to meet with the client. Esther, I do not require further explanation." John abruptly terminated the conversation, stating, "Your career is evidently of greater importance to you than our marriage." He then asserted that her career was of greater significance than her marriage, and that she was not required to provide an explanation. This was a reiteration of a narrative that he had encountered numerous times in the past, spanning several years. He exited the room, but before ascending the stairs, he paused and glanced at her. She sat with tears in her eyes. He advised her to reflect on her true desires and to consider this matter over the weekend. In the coming days, he would do the same. John then extinguished the light, ascended the stairs, and entered the guest room. He removed his clothes and climbed into bed. His attire ascended to the bed and attempted to sleep. He gazed at the ceiling for an extended period. Esther arose at an early hour. She had a brief, warm shower, donned a skirt and sweater, and pulled her hair into a ponytail. She did not consume breakfast. She collected her briefcase and promptly departed the residence. She was disinclined to interact with her. Her husband's demeanor had been disagreeable the previous night, and she was still disconcerted by his harsh words. She considered the possibility of maintaining this state of affairs indefinitely, but she dismissed the notion. She recognized the necessity of focusing on the task at hand, which was the completion of her work project. She resolved to address the issues in her marriage at a later time. Jan awoke at a late hour, well after Esther had. He felt exhausted and worn out. He had barely slept and was agitated and angry. He completed his morning routine, which included taking a shower and shaving. Finally, he went downstairs and prepared a pot of coffee. He noticed that the kitchen remained untouched. It appeared that Esther had not even made any coffee. He felt guilty. John sat at the table, his head in his hands, the coffee untouched in front of him. His head hurt, and the aspirin had not yet taken effect. His rage had subsided, and he felt remorse for his actions. John recognized that yelling at his wife was wrong. He had been grumpy and rude for months, and he was unsure why he had done so. Additionally, he was impatient with him, which resulted in more fights. John likes to think things through. He reflected on the past few months, attempting to identify the root cause of their recurring conflicts. However, he was unable to discern a single, clear reason. It appeared as though, without warning, they had transitioned from a loving couple to adversaries. What could have possibly led to such a drastic change? John wondered. He was resolved to fight for his marriage. He knew that he loved Es and would do whatever it took to fix things. He promised himself that he would control his temper and not act out. He thought about the argument the night before and smiled a little despite everything. He still loved his wife. He realized that he had overreacted to Esther's. He reflected on the upcoming business trip and regretted his loss of temper. It was almost noon, and he suddenly had an idea. He would surprise Esther at work and invite her to lunch. He needed to demonstrate to her that he was willing to change and be more supportive. He nodded to himself, approving of his plan. As he drove to Esther's office, John reflected on the day's events. He was humming to himself when he heard a thunk, indicating that he had a flat tire. He sighed and pulled into a diner's parking lot a few blocks away, where he stood by his car. He called for roadside assistance, and the service representative informed him that assistance would arrive in approximately 30 minutes to an hour. John decided to have a quick bite at the diner while he waited. While he waited at the diner, he proceeded to a booth. He was approached by LLA, a senior partner at Esther's law firm, who was sitting alone. She invited him to join her, stating, "John, what a pleasant surprise. Please join me. I haven't even ordered yet." John accepted the invitation and proceeded to join her. He took a seat and expressed his pleasure at seeing her. What was the reason for her visit on a Saturday? Had Emily expressed displeasure at his working schedule? His wife was away for the weekend, visiting a friend. He had gone to the office to retrieve a file and had stopped at the diner for a meal. He was inept in the kitchen, Lila replied with a laugh. "But what about you, John? Do you visit here often?" "No," John replied. "I was on my way to see if Esther wanted to eat lunch, but I got a flat tire. Now I'm waiting for aid." "At least you tried," LLA said. "The project Esther and Jim are working on should be finished shortly. We can all celebrate when they get back." I inquired, perplexed. I do not recall Esther mentioning him. Jim explained that he has been present for approximately 6 months. I am astonished that Esther has not mentioned him. They have been collaborating on this project for some time. At that point, a waitress approached to replenish their coffee cups. John experienced a sudden chill. John experienced a sudden onset of perspiration, a constriction in his throat, and a sensation of a red haze obscuring his vision. He was compelled to exert a significant degree of willpower to maintain his composure. It appeared that John had not been paying sufficient attention to the conversation. It seemed as if Esther and John inhabited disparate universes. John occasionally attempted to smile, but it was a forced and somewhat insincere gesture. Fortunately, Lee was able to perceive this. It is evident that John's smile did not reach his eyes. It can be assumed that we are all, to some extent, guilty of this on occasion. I am compelled to push myself to listen to Emily's words. Lee laughed, and John was forced to exert considerable resolve to remain in the booth, consume his tuna salad sandwich, drink his iced tea, and maintain the pretense of engagement. John attempted to engage in a conversation with Lee, but his mind was preoccupied with other matters. He attempted to suppress his anger and maintain a calm demeanor, but his heart was pounding and sweat was dripping from his armpits. Finally, he noticed the vehicle belonging to the car service pulling into the lot, prompting him to hastily make an excuse and flee. John drove home. He was on autopilot when he finally looked up and noticed his garage. He realized that he did not remember the drive from the diner to his residence. The journey was a haze. He took a deep breath, exited the automobile, and staggered into the home. His thoughts were disorganized, and he felt empty and lost. He was aware that he needed to take a moment to collect his thoughts, but he found it difficult to concentrate. His mind was in a state of turmoil, and he was unable to comprehend the reasons behind Esther's infidelity. His mind was filled with a sense of frustration and disbelief, screaming at him that she was cheating on him. He was overwhelmed by the realization that she was deceiving him, and that she was doing so right under his nose. He did not even notice, John stated aloud, his voice reverberating within the confines of the room. "That is not true. That is not true." "Shut up," he commanded, standing still and shaking, attempting to regain control. He was in excruciating pain and tears welled up in his eyes, which he repeatedly wiped away. He strolled slowly to the liquor cabinet. He then proceeded to pour himself a modest quantity of scotch, subsequently adding water to it. However, he was initially reluctant to dispose of the cup by pouring it into the sink, coming to the realization that this was not an optimal solution. He was not his father, and thus acted in a manner that was distinct from his predecessor. He proceeded to the bathroom to cleanse his face and then searched the medication cabinet for the small bottle of low-dose Xanax, the benzodiazepine medication that Esther had used to facilitate sleep. He paused for a moment, regarding the tablets in his hand, before shaking his head and returning the bottle. His lips curled into a cruel smile, and he nearly laughed at what he had planned to do. He felt a slight sense of calm as the shock of the unexpected discovery began to dissipate. His mind began to function again, albeit irregularly. Jim Moriarty was back. He reflected on how she had managed to balance her marriage and her romantic relationship. The question now is what to do about the situation. There was little doubt that she had been unfaithful to him for several months and that they were even going away together on business. He laughed. "No wonder she isn't interested in me, she's had enough from him." John knew that he could not bear his wife's infidelity. He was unable to remain married to her, he would have to take action. He would need to file for divorce. The word struck him as harsh and unpleasant, yet it was unavoidable. He briefly considered filing for annulment, but he realized it was too late. Perhaps they could have taken that step before she began her infidelity, but it was too late now. As JN sat as he contemplated his bleak future, the anguish he had been experiencing gave way to a detached, serene state of mind. He was filled with resentment towards his wife for her betrayal. He ceased to dwell on his emotions and instead focused on taking action. The deep lines of grief on his face gradually disappeared, replaced by a determined look. The formerly homeless boy who had previously navigated the challenging urban landscape asserted control. Despite the apparent evidence of Esther's infidelity, John retained a degree of skepticism. He recognized the necessity for substantiated proof before taking action. He sought tangible evidence of his wife's infidelity. Then, there would be no doubt. He gave a gloomy grimace, acknowledging the consequences of infidelity. "Sweetie, a rather expensive price," he murmured under his breath before picking up the phone. He did not notice the tears flowing down his cheeks as Stan Hopkins' voice resonated throughout the almost empty office. It was almost 3 o'clock. "Stan, I must depart shortly. Have you nearly concluded your tasks?" "Stan, you have a couple more hours. Jim is currently finalizing the initial section of the final draft, and I am nearing the end of my work here. Please remember that your flight departs at 7 p.m. tomorrow, your tickets will be on the counter. Get a good night's sleep and prepare for the meeting with Simmons. It should be routine, unless they think of something else to frighten us about. Please say farewell to Jim for me. See you everyone when you return." Stan Hopkins stated as he exited, leaving tomorrow evening to lead to another battle with JN. She thought to herself, wondering how they would ever get through this. Could they ever get back to the love they once had? Esther was worried again. She recognized that spending a couple of nights alone in a hotel with Jim, even in different rooms and even on different floors, could be problematic. She was concerned that if John were to discover a secret, she would have made a grave error in judgment. She was impatient with herself for not informing her husband that Jim was back at work. She had not done anything illegal and did not intend to do so, but she could not understand her own anxiety. When John came inside and gave her his jacket, he uttered a few words, then demanded, "Now, tell me what is going on. You did not sound like yourself over the phone. Would you like a drink or something?" "Nothing, Irene." John responded, "Thank you for allowing me to come over at such short notice. I really need to talk with you." Irene observed his fatigued countenance and reddened eyes. She surmised that something was amiss. She was aware that something untoward had occurred, but she was going to allow John to elucidate the situation. She empathized with him, as she felt that something was amiss. John entered the agreeable living room. The afternoon sun illuminated the space, making it feel warm and welcoming. If he had not been so despondent, he would have perceived how welcoming Irene's home was. He sat in a comfortable chair, crossed his legs, and looked at her. He smiled softly, experiencing a surge of emotion for his close friend, Irene. "I apologize for bringing my concerns to you," he said, attempting to chuckle. "It appears that you are the lucky one who has to hear them." Irene sat waiting, her body language indicating her eagerness to listen. JN began to elucidate his suspicions that Esther was engaging in an extramarital affair. "Irene," he explained, his voice rising in intensity, everything now made clear to him why our marriage had been increasingly strained over the previous months. His frigid demeanor, absence of affection, and disdain were evident. He could not recall the last time they had kissed. He spoke louder, pausing to calm down. He shed tears. "I can't remember the last time we kissed," he said. Irene felt bad for him and Esther, despite the information John provided. She found it difficult to think that Esther would cheat. She knew how much Esther adored him. John and Irene spoke gently. "Please listen. I understand. The news of Jim's return has undoubtedly caused you distress. However, it is possible that she did not inform you of this development because she anticipated your anger or wanted to spare you from distress. Could it be true?" JN simply shook his head. "Irene, I considered that possibility and attempted to believe it, but it does not align with the facts. His homecoming coincides with the onset of our difficulties. The beginning of our marital difficulties could not have been a mere coincidence. I had never suspected her when she said she needed to work late or on a Saturday. I was aware that her project was challenging, yet the late evenings, weekends, and unexpected absences began to strain our marriage. We engaged in heated discussions about it, and I advised her to reconsider her priorities. She asserted that she was prioritizing her professional obligations, labeling me as neurotic and attempting to reassure me that the situation would soon conclude and we would resume our previous dynamic." John paused, then smiled and said, "Let us be honest. Irene and Esther are currently with Jim, and I am unable to accept the dissolution of my marriage. It has reached a point of irremediable breakdown. I require substantiating evidence before I begin to process this information." The divorce proceedings caused Irene to gasp and grab her mouth. "Divorce?" John inquired. "Do not hastily conclude that your marriage has ended. All you have are suspicions. While the situation does not appear favorable, it is imperative to gather evidence before making any hasty decisions. Speak with her. You are aware that she cannot lie to you." "Irene, she has been deceiving me for months. She has become. You are more adept at this. Irene, you enjoy drama and stagecraft. Could you arrange for me to avoid being recognized? I intend to follow her and Jim to obtain the proof I require." Irene laughed, removing some of the stress. "John, you are going to be James Bond. Forget cosmetics. You will appear foolish, and the cosmetics will not endure. For days, but you might be flying out and just checking things out. You might realize you're completely wrong if you want to go unnoticed. To achieve this, simply modify a few things you never wear. For example, you never wear hats, so buy a ball cap. Alternatively, you could purchase some glasses from a dollar store instead of a suit. You could also wear a denim jacket with jeans, which is something no one else has. If you make these alterations, you will become unrecognizable. I assure you." John nodded in agreement. "I'll do just that. They don't expect to see me there, so I doubt they will know." Sitting there, Irene observed the interaction between John and Esther. It was a posture that felt strange to her. She had often sought solace from John and Esther when her romantic relationships had failed. However, the circumstances were now different. Irene had never imagined that she would be in this situation. She walked with John to the door and hugged him. She requested that he keep her updated on the situation. John promised and then slowly approached his car and drove away. Irene lingered in the doorway for a moment, deep in thought. She empathized with her friend and a new hypothesis emerged in her mind. She whispered to herself, John is going to leave Esther, he will be free. Irene swiftly rejected this notion, admonishing herself, you are their friend, not someone seeking to exploit them. Nevertheless, the idea persisted, planted and persisting. John, Esther cried out as she entered the room. Her husband had just entered from the rear deck and heard her call. His name was John. He stood there, noting how upset she appeared. Esther, calm down. I'm here. What is wrong? Sign off. No more excessive working hours. Things can return to normal. I am aware that we have had issues, but I ask that you allow me to finish this and I promise that things will improve. Esther waited. She clenched her hands. She expected John to be angry as he always is, but John just stood there, holding back his rage. Okay, Esther. I understand. I understand that there should be no shouting or harsh words. Go do what you have to do. We will talk when you return. We have a lot to talk about. He then exited the house and drove away, indicating that he was unable to remain in the same space as her. Esther observed his departure, noting that John had never previously exhibited such a strong emotional response. This prompted Esther to recognize that their marriage was facing significant challenges. She questioned whether they could possibly repair the damage caused by this incident. Despite her feelings of worry and fear, she also experienced a sense of anger. She wondered why John was unable to comprehend her professional responsibilities and provide her with the support she needed. That night, John returned home late. He had parked his vehicle by the river and proceeded to walk for several miles. Upon returning to his car, he was fatigued both physically and mentally. As he drove home, he found himself preoccupied with thoughts of marital difficulties. He attempted to reassure himself that worrying was futile and that the marriage needed to end. However, he was unable to shake off the feeling that this was an irrational response. He arrived home to a house that was dark and quiet. It was past midnight, and he quietly proceeded to the guest room, too tired to change his clothes. He kicked off his shoes and lay on the bed. Despite his troubled thoughts, he fell into a deep sleep. The following day was tense in the Watson household. John and Esther avoided each other when the taxi arrived in the afternoon. Esther picked up her briefcase and suitcase and left without saying a word to John. John watched from the window as she got into the cab and drove away. He began to have second thoughts about his plans for the next day. Esther's departure seemed to render his plans moot. He considered the possibility that their relationship might be over. He wondered whether it was important to him if she were to meet someone else. He decided that he needed proof and hard evidence to put his mind at rest. He booked into a hotel the following morning, dressed in a way that would avoid his being identified. He wore a Phillies baseball cap, funny glasses, a plaid shirt, pants, and a denim jacket. He was surprised at how different he appeared and felt confident that he would not be recognized. It was after 11 o'clock. The time was 12 a.m. Furthermore, he was aware that Esther would be absent from her room. He had planned to remain in the lobby, situated in a secluded area near the elevators, but in a position that would not be easily visible from the check-in desk. In the lobby, John proceeded to his room but paused when he encountered a flower shop. He entered the shop, procured a business card, and then proceeded to a secluded area. He proceeded to call the flower shop and ordered a dozen roses to be sent to Esther's room within the next hour. He then returned to the lobby and awaited the delivery. He observed a bellman carrying a vase of red roses and followed him to the elevator. The bellman, whose name tag identified him as Bill, pressed the button for the 12th floor. Bill pressed the button for the 12th level. Bill and John both exited the elevator at the 12th floor. Bill proceeded to the left, while John decelerated his pace. John observed Bill knock on the door, wait briefly, and then enter room 1212 with a key. John smiled, turned, and proceeded to the stairs. He was keen to avoid detection by Bill on the 11th floor. John approached the elevators, saw one heading down, and then pressed the button for the 4th floor. He disembarked at the 9th floor, where his room was located. John was seated in the lobby, holding a newspaper but not reading it. His gaze repeatedly shifted to the clock on the wall, and time appeared to move slowly at 6:33. At that moment, Esther entered the lobby accompanied by a tall, skinny, blond man whom John knew as James Moriarty. Despite the passage of years since their previous meeting, they both seemed strained and unhappy. It appeared that their encounter had not gone well. They were not saying much. Grasp Esther's elbow and attempt to guide her towards the dining area, but she resisted, shaking her head and proceeding to the elevators. Moriarty gave a noncommittal shrug and followed her. John observed the elevator lights as they came to a halt on the 8th floor, then ascended to the 12th. He realized John had been holding his breath and let out a significant sigh of relief. He proceeded to visit the hotel coffee shop, where he promptly consumed a sandwich and an iced tea. He was reluctant to be away for an extended period and promptly returned to his chair with the newspaper, feigning engagement with the reading material. He remained in this position until well after 11 p.m. The time was 12 a.m. Subsequently, he proceeded to his room, where he discovered that his suitcase remained on the bed. Engrossed in meditation, he proceeded to unpack, shower, and brush his teeth. Was Esther correct in her assumption? He found himself questioning whether his suspicions were misguided. They did not appear to be engaged in an illicit affair, their interactions seemed professional. John shook his head, questioning his own judgment. Was he being foolish? He undressed, donned his pajamas, and retired to bed, yet he was unable to sleep. He needed to think, to determine the truth of the matter. Had he been mistaken? John realized that he needed to put aside his sentiments and think logically, which he should have done months ago. However, being in love and believing your lover is being unfaithful makes it difficult to think clearly. John's thoughts were muddled. He understood that he had to complete the undercover operation, go home and discuss with Esther, and express his concerns and misgivings without escalating the conflict. Every time they tried to discuss their difficulties, they ended up arguing. It was possible that he was also at fault, but this time they had to either address their problems or accept that the relationship was untenable. The relationship was over. John experienced a sudden sense of emptiness, contemplating the prospect of a life without Esther. He had always loved her, but he was aware that love could potentially transform into bitterness if not handled with care. John exhaled, still uncertain about the future. Despite his reservations, he turned over and entered a restless slumber. He awoke the next morning, feeling as if he hadn't slept sufficiently. His head hurt, and he had a bitter taste in his mouth. He promptly took a shower and brushed his teeth. He dressed and proceeded to the coffee shop, not feeling particularly hungry. He consumed toast and coffee and contemplated his options. He recognized the necessity of investigating the possibility that Esther's affair was a product of his imagination. He experienced a sense of humiliation. He was not wont to hastily form conclusions. He needed to be objective and acknowledge that his concerns might be baseless. He elected to remain for the second night he had reserved. He had observed the lobby once more, but he was beginning to doubt that he would discern anything anomalous that evening. John resumed his seat in the lobby. He had procured another newspaper, but he was not perusing it. He kept gazing at the clock. It was past 7. At 7:14, Esther entered the lobby, prompting a sense of concern. However, this feeling was transient, as Esther and Moriarty were observed laughing and embracing. Moriarty's arm was around Esther, and he was whispering in her ear. This prompted a sudden drop in John's heart rate, accompanied by a sense of delight and a flush on Esther's cheeks. She proceeded to enter the dining room and take a seat in a location that afforded her privacy. Esther was gratified that they had finally succeeded in persuading Simon to sign the agreement, following months of strenuous effort and lengthy hours. She felt a sense of vindication, as though her endeavors had finally been rewarded. She believed that her success would pave the way for a partnership within the firm. She was cheerful and fondly recalled her dining partner, Jim. Despite his reputation with the ladies, Jim was a smart lawyer who worked extremely hard. He would contribute to the project's success, and she would ensure that he received the credit he earned. Jim exclaimed excitedly, "I can't believe it is finally over. I'm almost dizzy from all of the months we spent working on it." He called the waiter and Esther was on the verge of declining the request, but then she dismissed the notion, reasoning that there was no reason not to accept. She had a notion that they had earned this moment. They proceeded to consume their dinner at a leisurely pace, savoring each bite. They then proceeded to consume the entire bottle of wine in a relatively short period of time. They engaged in conversation with ease, both exhibiting a sense of relaxation and contentment with their success. Esther then glanced at her wristwatch and observed that it was nearly 9 o'clock. The time was 10 p.m. "Okay, Jim, it is getting late and we have a flight to catch tomorrow," she said. "It is time to call it a night." Her voice was slightly slurred. "Oh, Essie, come on, it's not too late. Let us not end the night yet. How about we go to the lounge and relax a little more?" Jim pleaded. "We are both on a high from today. We need to relax just a few more drinks." "The night is still young," she replied. "Young?" Esther paused and laughed at Jim's hopeful expression. "Why not?" she asked. "I have a thought. It's really early." "Okay, Jim. I'll go up to my room and change out of this suit. I'll be down in a bit, but only for one drink." Jim watched eagerly as Esther walked to the elevators. He took a deep breath. He experienced a sense of relief upon seeing her enter the lounge alone. He considered returning to his room, but ultimately decided to have a drink there instead. He felt the need to relax after seeing Esther and Moriarty at the hotel together. John found a seat at the end of the bar and ordered a scotch and water. He observed Moriarty sitting in a corner booth. He was compelled to consider his own presence there. He swiftly turned away, disinclined to be observed from that vantage point. The mirror behind the bar afforded him a comprehensive view of the lounge area, yet he was careful to avoid detection. He gradually sipped his drink, noting a gradual reduction in his tension. He began to contemplate the situation. He considered the possibility that his concerns were unwarranted and devised an apology for Esther that she would be unable to decline. His gaze repeatedly shifted to the mirror, where he observed Moriarty in the booth, consuming the single beverage he had ordered. The lounge was not particularly busy, and John noted that it was nearly 9 o'clock. "The time is 30 p.m. As he was on the verge of departure, he experienced a sudden sensation of unease. Esther, attired in a simple white blouse, a tight black skirt, and a string of pearls around her neck, entered the lounge. John recognized those pearls. He had gifted them to her on the occasion of her 40th birthday. He observed Moriarty in the booth and proceeded to walk over to it. Moriarty stood up, took her hand, and led her to the booth. He then sat down beside her. Due to the distance between them, he was unable to hear their conversation. However, he could see their interaction in the mirror. The way they were together conveyed a significant amount of information. Moriarty observed the bar girl and ordered drinks. He then provided her with monetary compensation, accompanied by a smile. The beverages arrived, and the two individuals proceeded to sip and converse in a cheerful manner. John maintained his observation of the scene, noting his wife's laughter and radiant demeanor. She appeared to be exceedingly happy. Moriarty's hand brushed against her own, and he spoke softly to her. John experienced a profound sense of indignation. He was no longer uncertain about the situation. He sat in silence, his thoughts clear. He witnessed his wife's apparent infatuation with the other men and recognized the imminent dissolution of their marriage. However, John resolved not to acquiesce passively. He sat there, a grim smile on his face, watching the two in the booth. Esther giggled at something Moriarty whispered to her, and she giggled again, feeling the effects of the wine and the drinks. She did not object when Moriarty ordered another round. Esther felt great on top of the world. She considered the world an opportune moment to celebrate the fruits of her labor. She consumed the next glass of wine with haste, unaware that Moriarty was signaling for more. She felt warm and happy. She then felt Moriarty's lips on hers. She attempted to push him away, but her hands betrayed her. Instead of pushing, she grasped his shirt, pulling him closer. In a simplified version of events, Esther experienced a degree of clarity and pulled away. "No, no, no," she gasped. "I can't. I'm married." However, Moriarty ignored her feeble protests and kissed her neck gently. Esther felt desire once more, and it was evident what he desired. Moriarty took the opportunity to move his hand to touch her. Esther rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Please, Jim. We shouldn't." "It's wrong," but she didn't attempt to stop him. She lifted her head and kissed him. The alcohol made everything fuzzy and exciting. Suddenly, a familiar voice broke in. "The moment I see you, I don't mind if I join," said John, slipping into the seat across from them. He placed a newspaper and some clothes on the table. Esther, confused, realized her husband was sitting there. Her hand went to her mouth, and her face turned pale. Moriarty, struggling to fix his pants, tried to leave but stopped when John snarled, "Move, and I'll rip your face off." Moriarty stayed seated, looking scared. He remembered his first encounter with Esther's husband. Esther felt a chill, the excitement disappeared. John's sudden appearance felt like cold water thrown in her face. On her, she observed the anger in his eyes. "Tell me I'm paranoid," John said in a cold tone. "Tell me I'm being unreasonable. How I should be more understanding." JN turned to Moriarty, who was visibly uneasy. "I should thank you. At least you pulled your hand away when I arrived. I'm not sure if my dear Esther's wife would have behaved in a similar manner." Esther gasped, tears forming in her eyes. She felt sick and dizzy. The man in front of her did not resemble her husband. It was not just his peculiar attire, it was also his cold eyes and cruel smile. Then, she realized that his eyes displayed pure hatred. She should apologize. For interrupting, John sneered, "I should have permitted you to conclude or to withdraw to another room to continue your illicit affair." His voice was harsh and strained. Esther trembled, tears running down her cheeks. "No, John," she implored, "it is not what it appears to be. I never." Her voice faded. John let out a laugh, devoid of any humor. "Joy, Esther, it is precisely what it appears to be. Your former romantic interest has arrived, and you are eager to reunite with him. For how long has he been with you? It is unsurprising that you have been discontented with me, and that your discontent has intensified recently. He has exceptional abilities at the gym. How did it feel, Esther? How did you enjoy knowing I'd feel humiliated?" Jay's voice transformed into a hiss, spittle flying. "Wait a minute, buddy," Moriarty interjected, but he ceased when he observed John's rage. "Get out," John commanded. "One day, I'll be there." "Maybe." John warned that he would eventually come for her. When she saw him, it would be the day he killed her. She might try to flee, but it would not help her much. She was advised to leave before he attacked. Moriarty did not wait, he quickly left. Almost running, John chuckled grimly, watching him go. He then turned back to his wife, who stared at him in horror. She had never heard him speak like that before, and everything felt unreal. John looked at her dirty clothes, and his wrath intensified. He sat and wondered what had gone wrong between them. Was it him? Was he a bad husband, or was Esther just upset with him? John instantly realized that he didn't care, it didn't matter why. Esther's voice, full of emotion, shattered his thoughts. "John, please. I lost control. I let things go too far. Please forgive me. I was pleased about the Simmons contract and loss of control. I am sorry." Her voice weakened as she cried. JN simply gazed at her. "Esther, be silent. I do not wish to hear any further falsehoods," he mumbled. He pulled the newspaper from the table, revealing her red panties. John listened to her sobs. I recall that he spoke while touching the fabric. He said, "I gave these to you on your birthday about a year ago. You mentioned that scarlet was your favorite color. Perhaps you should take these and form a large A to wear on your dress." He then paused, as if searching for the right words. "Oh, but we don't do that anymore, right?" he finally asked. "It is unfortunate that this practice has been discontinued. It may have been beneficial in ensuring the safety of others." JN assumed that you had informed him that you intended to retain these items for a specific event. He paused to recollect that you had never worn them, at least not in his presence. "Esther, did you wear them?" "You did wear them today, but you were with your new romantic interest." His voice, "Your presence here is no longer required. Stay with Moriarty. You need not concern yourself with my current state of mind. However, do not return home. Wait until I am gone. I will be leaving in a day or two. Ensure that you do not contact me before then. I do not wish to see you, Esther. I do not wish to interact with you." Please maintain your distance until I have departed. I am filing for divorce, he continued in a despondent tone. I will retain possession of the house, but you may retain the furnishings. I will never set foot inside it again. I will only take what I need. Clothing and personal belongings, as well as research materials necessary for professional endeavors, will be divided between the two of us. However, the work you have consistently derided, the work I have done for this company, will be retained by me. John's mouth formed a grimace. He advised her not to engage in further conflict. Essie, if you do, I will reveal what I saw tonight, and it will be to your detriment. It would be detrimental to your professional advancement, as well as to any romantic relationships you may have. Would you really want that? Keeping his gaze fixed on hers, John picked up Esther's undergarment and placed it in his pocket. He then rose up and moved away from the table. He came to a halt, returned his gaze to Esther, who was quietly crying, and turned to continue walking. John Watson had moved out of their home 3 months ago. He began the divorce process as promised, and Esther was fighting hard despite his warning that he would reveal her infidelity with Moriarty. John discovered a great deal about himself during he came to recognize that he was unable to divulge their personal issues to the general public. Was it due to a sense of embarrassment or a desire to protect his wife's reputation? The precise motivation was inconsequential. Regardless of the reason, he was unable to fulfill his threat. His legal counsel and friend, Sherwood Holmes, informed him that Esther would continue to oppose the divorce unless John agreed to speak with her privately and without restrictions. Esther asserted that she deserved to be heard if John still wished to pursue the divorce after the conversation. Holmes then informed John that Esther was prepared to cease her efforts to prevent the divorce if John would agree to speak with her privately. Esther was aware that she was a skilled lawyer who could prolong the proceedings indefinitely. John was therefore urged to sit down and listen to her. John remained silent in Holmes's office. He was not comforted by the plush leather chairs, the dark wood walls, or the numerous law books. Instead, he looked out the window at the bare trees and gray sky. He then returned home and informed Esther that he would ignore her demands. He stated that he no longer cared about the divorce proceedings. John, please listen. We have been friends for a long time. I am more than just your lawyer, I am your friend. It is important to remember that this will cost you a significant amount of money, even with the discount that the company is offering. Given my role in this situation, it would be beneficial for you to sit down and listen to her. You can proceed with your life, John. He shakes his head in negation. I refuse to communicate with her. I will not engage in discourse with her. I understand that you believe I am being obstinate, but I am aware of what she is going to say. I trust that I am correct in my assessment. She will either admit to her affair and seek forgiveness or attempt to lie about it. I am not interested in hearing it. There is nothing she can say to alter my opinion. I am aware that you are correct about the financial implications. You may inform Esther that I will not engage in any further communication with her. She is at liberty to take whatever action she deems appropriate. She may choose to delay the divorce proceedings if she so wishes. The possibility of remarriage is remote. Well, John smiled a bit and let out a bitter laugh. Perhaps she will agree to the divorce when she finds another partner and wants to move on. I am no longer concerned with this matter. Holmes shrugged. Okay, John, I will inform her that we will hold all the relevant documents until you are ready to proceed. However, I would appreciate it if you would contact me when you are able to do so. Have dinner. It has been a considerable period of time since we have had an opportunity to meet. He paused, his voice fading. John stood and placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. I am sorry, Woody. It has been over a year since Mary's passing. I am discussing my own issues, and I am aware that you are still grieving. I will contact you shortly. We'll have dinner and a few beers, Holmes said, smiling. He walked John out of the office. John stood for a moment, shaking his head in sympathy, watching his friend walk out the front door into the cold, gray afternoon. It did not take John long to drive home. He parked in the driveway and slowly walked. Upon entering his townhouse, he paused for a moment, taking in the space. He had moved in approximately 6 weeks ago and had invested a significant amount in renovations, including repainting, installing new carpets, and furnishing the space. He had promised himself that he would start his new life in a comfortable and appealing place. However, he was not inclined to live in a manner that was overly restrictive or ascetic. His status as a single individual was not a new one, he was only 46 years of age. There existed the possibility of a life after marriage, a marriage that he hoped would eventually come to an end. John paced around his new residence, glancing about while still annoyed at Esther's stubbornness. The property boasted a spacious living room and dining room, a modern kitchen with an elaborate stone countertop, and the property boasts several notable features, including ensuite bathrooms, one of which is directly connected to the master bedroom. However, the most noteworthy addition is a small room situated just off the living area, accessible via sliding glass doors. Inside, one will find a modern hot tub equipped with the latest features. John recalls spending numerous hours in this tub, relaxing and unwinding while alleviating muscle tension and soothing his troubled mind. Meanwhile, Irene was engaged in a heated discussion with Tony, attempting to resolve their differences. "The world," she shouted, "it's just not working, you know that. It was great, but it's just not working. You're just scared of your mother." Tony retorted, "She wants you to marry a nice Italian girl." "Well, I'm not good enough for her. Get out." A slight, ironic smile appeared on her face. It was not that she truly loved Tony, it was simply exasperating that she could not maintain a relationship with a man. She wondered why she was unable to find someone who truly loved her after all these years. Why was it so difficult to find someone to share her life with? Taking a deep breath, Irene proceeded to the bathroom, sat down, and relieved herself. She then stepped into the shower and allowed the hot water to wash over her, feeling some tension melt away. She proceeded to wash, then stepped out and dried herself with a towel. After hanging up the towel, she reached for her robe and paused to look at herself in the mirror. She observed a tall, mature woman in the prime of her life. Her dark hair was now shorter and framed her face. Her light olive skin was flawless. She grimaced and muttered, "Darn it." Then, through the bathroom door, open, Irene impatiently threw the robe over her shoulders and flopped onto the bed, picking up a novel she had started. She attempted to engage with the uninteresting plot, but soon discarded the book. "I require a beverage," she stated aloud. She proceeded to the kitchen, retrieved a glass, ice, and a measure of bourbon, and returned to the living room. Irene sipped her drink and contemplated the trajectory of her life. "See self-pity," she muttered. "I require companionship. I must depart this place." An idea suddenly occurred to her, and she picked up the phone to call John. "Hello. Irene, are you currently engaged in other activities? I would like to visit you." She listened to his reply. "That is excellent. I will see you in an hour or sooner as the sun sets." Irene pulled into John's driveway, exited her vehicle, and proceeded on foot to the front door. Before she could ring the bell, the door opened, and John pulled her into the warm hallway. "Perfect timing, sweetheart." John informed her that the delivery person had just left with the food still hot. "Come on, give me your coat, and let's eat." John laughed while "You are quite confident. It is possible to sweep a girl off her feet, and this is an excellent strategy. I was previously unaware of my hunger, but now that you have mentioned it, I am experiencing a strong desire to eat. Please lead the way." They conversed while eating takeout Chinese food. After discarding the empty containers in the trash, they proceeded to the living room, where they consumed the last of the wine from an open bottle. They continued their cordial discussion until their drinks were empty. John considered. He proceeded to open another bottle of alcohol, but then looked at Irene and stated, "I think it's time to move on from these trivial conversations. Let's discuss the more pressing issues at hand." He then got up and retrieved a quality bottle of scotch from the bar cabinet, pouring a generous amount into 2 glasses filled with ice. He handed one glass to Irene and sat down in an easy chair that was situated across from her. He took a sip of his drink and looked at his friend, saying, "My dear friend, I'm here to listen. Please, tell me what is troubling you." Irene giggled while sipping her drink. "It is of an extremely high quality. I was previously unaware that you possessed such refined taste in alcoholic beverages." JN sat calmly observing her. "Oh, dear. I suppose you are more familiar with my romantic history than I am. It is Tony who has terminated our relationship today. What is the matter with me, John? Why am I unable to maintain a romantic partnership? What if you were aware of the reason?" Why did you not inform me at an earlier juncture? Please remain silent, John. She was visibly distressed. You were previously presented with this information, yet you failed to comprehend its significance. Do you believe that we were compatible with any of the individuals you introduced to us? JN stated, in a sincere manner, that you are both remarkably attractive and intelligent. You have the potential to form relationships with any individual you desire, yet the individuals you select may ultimately prove to be detrimental to you. It is imperative that you reflect on this matter. Irene sat there, with her mouth agape. She initially experienced a surge of anger within her eyes. It was challenging for her to comprehend the words that John had just spoken. He did not merely imply that she was incorrect, he explicitly stated that she was incorrect. She was uncertain how to select suitable partners, but she was not lacking in intelligence. After a period of reflection, she considered John's assertion and acknowledged its veracity. The men she had dated were unsuitable partners. She had never been in a positive relationship that had ended well. She whispered, "You are correct. Why had I not recognized this before? What is the cause of my behavior?" She considered seeking medical advice. She stated, "I may need to see a doctor about this." She continued, "Now that I have considered this, you are correct. I may also be a failure, and this is why I choose failures." John objected while standing, indicating that he wished to replenish their beverages. He then proceeded to retrieve additional drinks, stating, "You are not a loser." However, he acknowledged that it might be beneficial to seek the counsel of an impartial third party. This could prove an effective approach. John paused, then emitted a brief, sad laugh. "Perhaps I need that too," he admitted, "I'm not thinking clearly either." The two exchanged glances for a moment, and then John attempted to suppress his laughter. Irene, however, allowed herself a slight grin, and they soon found themselves laughing heartily. "We're quite the pair, Irene," John observed. She said, taking a large sip from her glass, "At the very least, you enjoyed nearly 2 decades of happiness with one woman." She promptly placed her palm over her mouth. She noticed John's eyes begin to well up with tears. "John, that simply slipped out. I did not mean it." "Nah, that is okay. Renee, you're correct. These were mainly good years. That is why things are so sad right now. I often wonder how many other men she was with over those happy years. When you lose trust in someone you care for, you often wonder how many other people they were with during the time you were together." John reflected that uncertainty had become a pervasive aspect of his life. He then proceeded to refill their cups. He was pleased that Renee had come over. They could drink together. John and Renee engaged in conversation and gradually became intoxicated, as they had intended. They both realized that binge drinking would make them feel worse later, particularly the following morning. However, at that moment, they were not concerned about that. Johnny was slurring his words. "Irene, what is that tub outside the spa?" John inquired, attempting to focus. "That is a beneficial suggestion. Let us proceed to the spa." "Come," John stumbled over to her, and the two of them proceeded into the small alcove. Arms around each other. "That is unfortunate." Johnny Irene replied regretfully. "I did not bring a swimsuit." "Forget it. Let us go skinny dipping." John laughed. Irene also. She responded with a laugh, and they proceeded to disrobe. In due course, they were both naked. JN had always maintained the spa at a comfortable temperature, given the frequency with which he utilized it. Consequently, the water was still warm even at this late hour. They paused for a moment, exchanging glances. JN, gradually regaining consciousness from his drunken stupor, observed, "You look fantastic." Irene blushed slightly but did not feel shy. "You don't look bad either," she added. "Irene," JN replied, "you're not so bad after all." He helped her into the warm, bubbling water. They sat next to each other, enjoying the sensation of water on their bare skin. The proximity of the other person was keenly felt. John's mind was hazy from the alcohol, but he was aware that he needed to proceed with caution. He was reluctant to jeopardize his friendship with Irene by taking any action that might be misinterpreted as inappropriate. Irene, on the other hand, was less concerned about the potential consequences of her actions. She was curious about whether John would be angry if she made a move, but she was also uncertain about whether he would be angry if she did not make a move. She believed she had made progress in her relationship with John. He, however, sensed her advances and, after a few moments, splashed water on his face. "I am sorry, Renee. I am unsure what happened. I cannot, and I simply cannot do this." The soft robes hanging on the deck, she put on another robe and led John to the bedroom where he lay down like a child. He seemed to fall asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow, cognizant of the fact that she was unable to drive in her condition. Irene, therefore, proceeded to the second bedroom and crawled into bed, unable to sleep. Irene came to understand that, despite being separated from Esther, John was not available. She was aware that he would never be, and she also recognized that her feelings for John were not romantic in nature. He was her closest friend, but they were not involved in a romantic relationship. Her eyes filled with tears, not because of that, but because of the pain she was experiencing on her friend's behalf. It was unfortunate that John loved Esther with a special kind of love. Her infidelity would haunt him forever. "Irene, I recognize that I made a mistake, and I acknowledge that it was a significant one. However, I believe that John is incorrect in his assumption that I have been unfaithful to him. I have never engaged in an affair with Jim or any other man. He seems to believe that I have been unfaithful to him." For several months, Esther remained silent, her thoughts racing. She needed to persuade John that he was mistaken. She had a thought: he needed to understand that what he witnessed was a one-time event. Esther had been going through a difficult time in recent months. She had lost weight and appeared tired and pale. She barely had the energy to do anything other than work. Irene decided to pay her a visit. Irene knew John was struggling, and seeing Esther confirmed her suspicions that she was as well. "I believe I understand Esther," Irene spoke gently, "but I do not. I attempted to engage in a discussion with John, but he was uncooperative and refused to listen or speak with me. He has never exhibited such a degree of obstinacy." Esther murmured to herself, "I believe I misheard him. Irene, he is even reluctant to face me, and I do not blame him." Tears welled up in Esther's eyes each time I felt I had reached my limit. Tears continued to flow. Esther stood, wiped her eyes, and requested that Renee remain with her for a period of time. She needed to undertake a task and required substantial support. Could Renee remain? Irene replied that she was unable to assist in a more substantial manner. Esther glanced at her watch. She then reached for the telephone, hoping that he would still be in his office. "Hello, Woody," she said. "This is Esther. I would like to come and see you in the morning." She listened for a moment, then said, "Yes, I have decided to give John what he wants, with no conditions." "Thank you, Woody." She then hung up and turned to Irene. "I am going to give John what he wants. The dissolution of their marriage is a justifiable course of action." Irene appeared disconcerted. "Esther, this is an ill-advised decision. You both have feelings for each other. Perhaps I can intervene with John again. Please allow me to attempt to do so." Esther responded in the negative. "John needs to move on from this marriage. Fighting the divorce is not a constructive approach. Our marriage is over. It is over, and it is my fault. I am unable to deceive myself any longer." Her voice grew firmer, almost breaking. "Please, Irene, I will stay for as long as you need." Irene squeezed Esther's cold hands. Esther is not going to fight the divorce. Meanwhile, John Watson was stunned by what he had just heard. He had just received a communication from his legal representative, Woody. The situation appeared to be that Esther was attempting to expedite the proceedings. He was not inclined to concede without a fight. After a brief interval, he responded, "Very well, let her come. Let's see if she signs without any conditions. I am not optimistic, however. I will be at dinner at 7:00. See you then," walking around his home. John was deep in thought, experiencing a sense of unease despite the circumstances warranting happiness. This was the outcome he had desired. He was unsure of the cause of his distress. He needed a beer, he decided, heading for the kitchen. The phone rang just as he opened the fridge. "Hello," he said. "Oh hi. Irene, what is the purpose of this meeting?" "Irene, I am not interested in your reasons for contacting me. Irene, I am meeting with Woody tonight. You are invited to join us. I will pick you up at 6:30. We will leave together. No further communication is necessary. Irene, I will see you tonight. Bye. That evening, John and Irene arrived at the restaurant. They saw Woody already at the table. John introduced them. He noticed that they were acting in a way that indicated they were uncomfortable. Irene, who was somewhat reserved, displayed a noticeable redness in her cheeks, and Woody appeared reluctant to relinquish her hand. This prompted a jovial response from JN, who commented that the pair resembled adolescents on a first date. Both Woody and Irene blushed and promptly took their seats. Irene then interjected with a smile, "Shalou, you're embarrassing us." As the evening progressed, there was minimal discussion about John's divorce. Instead, the focus shifted to other topics. It was agreed that they would await Esther's signature on the relevant documents. For the time being, they were merely biding their time, attempting to discern what would transpire next. However, this proved an exercise in futility, so at the dinner table, the conversation turned to Woody Holmes and Irene Adler. John felt somewhat marginalized, but this did not trouble him unduly. He observed and listened with a genial smile as his companions engaged in increasingly animated discussion. It was evident that they held mutual interest. John postulated that this could prove beneficial for both parties. Woody might finally move on from his wife's demise, and Irene might have found a suitable partner. John proceeded to the restroom, washed his hands, and returned to the table. He appeared nervous and began to stutter. John gave him a look. Woody began blushing. "I hope this is not the case." John interrupted, "What do you want to drive me home?" "I hope you don't mind," Irene said quickly, her face also turning pink. "Well, I don't know about that," John teased. "Remember, I'm the one who brought you here and drove you home." "Him?" John laughed and looked warmly at his friend. "Of course not," he said. "I don't mind at all." She added that she was reluctant to engage in further communication with him. Holmes observed that she appeared fatigued and pallid. He exhaled, acknowledging the depth of her distress. "I am truly sorry." I attempted to influence his perspective, but John can be challenging. "I am gratified that you are not resisting this course of action. It is beneficial for both of you," Holmes remarked. Esther nodded and requested the documents. Woody provided them. "Provide her with the documents and have her sign them without reading them. Surprise him." "You're not going to read it," Woody said. "Why?" "I trust you," Woody replied. "I know you're a good lawyer. You know what to do, and John won't betray me." "He has more ethics than I do," she replied gently, flushing slightly. Given that Esther has now signed the divorce papers without stating anything prior, there is a possibility that John will be less stubborn. Presumably, he felt compelled to speak before explaining what he did. However, whatever would he do if he doesn't change his mind? It is understandable that Esther feels that she damaged their marriage. She had hoped that they could at least become friends. "Once more, I apologize, Woody. I must regain my composure." She rose from her seat and murmured, "Please forgive me. I have to go." She then hastened from the office. Woody bowed his head in solemn reflection, then reached for the telephone. "Hello, Renee. It is I, Esther. I am greatly troubled about her. She has signed the divorce papers." It would be inaccurate to say that he was surprised. "What did he say?" "Listen, I know you are close with John. Could you meet with him and inform him that the divorce is final? Tell him that Esther did not read the divorce agreement. We might make him feel bad about not talking to her." Woody laughed. "Yes, we are interfering, but for a good reason. I am happy that you agreed. We are aware that John will eventually regain his composure and act rationally. It would be beneficial for him to speak with her, and we believe that he will do so." His assertion that she is capable of handling the situation was encouraging. "We are still planning to meet tonight. Goodbye." He stood there, questioning the wisdom of listening to Irene and Woody. He was reluctant to revisit the pain of his past experiences. He was not inclined to dwell on Esther's betrayal. The memory of the hotel continued to evoke distress and nausea. His last conversation with Irene still troubled him. Irene reiterated what Esther had informed her, that Esther was not attempting to justify her actions by claiming that they were a result of the success of a project. There was an excessive amount of alcohol present, and Jim was there flattering her. John had become enraged, stating that she was claiming that she only loved the men who was present. Please remove that, John. You understand that that is not what I am trying to convey. Irene abruptly interjected, stating that they had finally Irene succeeded in persuading John to meet Esther. When the door opened, Esther stood there illuminated from behind. John was on the verge of turning away. John, please come inside, she pleaded. John stood tall and forced a weak smile as he walked in. Okay, thank you, Esther, he murmured. That house, once a place he felt at home in, now seemed strange. John surveyed the room with rapid, sweeping glances. Nothing appeared to have changed, everything seemed to be in its accustomed state, with the exception of a thin layer of dust on all surfaces. This was surprising to him, given that Esther was known for maintaining a tidy and clean environment. He was not accustomed to seeing such a buildup of dust. He remained silent, offering no immediate response. Thank you for agreeing to see me, John said, his voice calm and measured. Esther, he added, his tone formal and respectful. Spoke softly. I am grateful for your consideration and pledge not to exceed the allotted time. I am here at the urging of Woody and Irene. I am uncertain how this will benefit anyone, but given your acquiescence to the divorce, I agreed to meet with Esther. She was aware of this. The forthcoming conversation would undoubtedly be challenging, but she was adequately prepared for it. She was compelled to inform John of the truth and acknowledge her significant misstep. She hoped he would grant her forgiveness. John, if you could just listen, I believe it would be beneficial for us both. She gazed at him with a hint of pleading in her eyes. John paused, his gaze intense, before nodding and sitting with a certain stiffness. Okay, Esther, I'm listening. John was silent for a moment, taking a deep breath. He then stated that he believed her when she said that she had never been with Jim or any other man besides him. He acknowledged that she had no intention of doing so. He then asked her to explain what she meant by the incident that night. He said that he knew what she had done made it difficult for him to believe her, but that she must be telling the truth. She then proceeded to explain the situation in detail. John then interjected, stating that the truth is rarely simple or pure. Esther blushed and begged him to listen to her. She fought back tears as she spoke, her voice quavering. I am unable to provide an explanation for my foolish actions that night. I have reflected extensively on the incident, attempting to comprehend why I allowed it to occur. I have no justifications, I have been plagued by self-reproach and anguish. I have repeatedly questioned why I permitted Jim to engage in such behavior. Her eyes brimmed with tears, her cheeks wet. I wish I had the opportunity to. The explanation is straightforward. The primary motivations were the elation and reprieve derived from the successful completion of the contract, coupled with the considerable quantity of alcohol consumed. It is worth noting that I have not imbibed more than a glass of wine since that incident. John sat with a countenance devoid of expression, grappling with his mounting fury despite his sentiments. He was convinced by her assertion. She had not engaged in sexual intercourse with Jim or any other individual, yet this belief offered him no solace and only intensified his inner turmoil. I also felt a degree of resentment towards you, Esther. I acknowledge that my reaction may appear unjustified, but I was genuinely disappointed in your lack of support. While this may not justify my actions, it is a truth I must acknowledge. I have replayed that night in my mind countless times. I have been ruminating on this matter. I am aware that my feelings on the matter are superficial and that I am experiencing a sense of self-loathing. However, I cannot hate you more than I hate myself. She procured a tissue and dabbed at her eyes. I am sorry for the tears, John. I promised myself I would not cry, but here I am breaking that promise. She whispered, John, is there any what measures might be taken to salvage the marriage? Counseling, perhaps, or some other form of intervention. JN regarded her for a moment, then exhaled and reclined in his chair. He felt a sense of emptiness, as if he had lost something precious. Esther, if I hadn't shown up that night, would you have ended up in bed with Jim? Would you have allowed him to seduce you? Esther was taken aback. She was aware that John's assertion was accurate. She would have ultimately engaged in sexual intercourse with Jim had she not shown up that night. However, John dismissed her concerns, stating, "Esther, that's precisely the point. You engaged in infidelity by allowing him to kiss you. You also engaged in infidelity by reciprocating his kiss with one of your own." Esther had indeed committed infidelity when she permitted Jim to undress her and touch her. She had promised herself, her husband, and her vows to him. John's voice rose, but he took a deep breath to calm down. He did not want an argument. Esther nodded, finally understanding the depth of her actions. She felt sick and hopeless, tears falling again. John looked at her with pity. "I feel sorry for you," he said gently. "I feel sorry for us. Perhaps it is not entirely your fault. Perhaps I should have shared some of the blame. Perhaps I should have been more helpful and kind. However, that does not negate what you did that night. I have to. I must consider a challenging question: would it be more straightforward to live with doubt or regret? Is it feasible to move past this and remain married? Can I dedicate my life to distrusting you, continually questioning whether you will betray me again? Can I continue to live in constant apprehension, waiting to see if you will falter again? Or should I? To live without experiencing sadness regarding the dissolution of our marriage, the lack of fidelity on your part, my inadequacy, and the inability to reconcile the past, even with forgiveness, is challenging." J.N. paused, and tears welled in his eyes. He apologized, stating that regret is easier to bear. Time passed, and John felt sorry for his wife, who was curled up on the couch crying. He turned and walked out the door into the night. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe. If you haven't already, also write a comment below with your thoughts on what transpired. Take care.